Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami deva deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadattatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Jana. So we are on Sunday, May 13th, 1883. And we're at the beginning of that day, and it is on the bottom of page 221 in the New York edition and other similarly paginated editions. So we'll begin. The Master paid a visit to the Hari Bhakti Pradayini Sabha of Kancharipara in Calcutta on the anniversary day of that religious society. Kirtan and other forms of devotional music had been arranged for the occasion. The songs centered round the Vrindavan episode of Sri Krishna's life. The theme was Radha's peak because of Sri Krishna's having visited Chandravali, another of the gopis of Vrindavan. Radha's friends tried to console her and said to her, "Why are you piqued? It seems you are not thinking of Krishna's happiness, but only of your own." Radha said to them, "I am not angry at his going to Chandravali's grove, but why should he go there? She doesn't know how to take care of him." And that's the end of that day. So obviously on this must have been one of the days that came in the, I should have checked, but I don't think I have the old edition of the gospel from the Bengali gospel from the Kathamrita Bhavan, where it was in 5 separate volumes. And the volumes were not chronological with each other. That is, where one volume left off, the next volume picked up. But each volume covered the whole period of Srima's association with Sri Ramakrishna. So my guess is that this particular day, because that's all that's recorded of that day, it probably was in the last volume. So anyway, the important things here are, first of all, that again, Sri Ramakrishna used to go and join in the religious activities, celebrations, festivals of all different communities. He had no narrowness in that sense, that this is my community and that's not my community, but went to share with all. And so here he went to the Hari Bhakti Pradayini Sabha. So that obviously was a Vaishnava gathering. In Bengal in those days, and it's fairly much the same now, though there's more diversity in Bengal than there was, religious diversity than there was at that time. At that time, people were divided mainly between the Vaishnavas and the Shaktas. The Shaktas being Tantrikas. Well, Vaishnavas also had Tantras, and so that was not a division between Vaishnavas and Shaktas. The Tantric tradition spread through all of the different aspects of Indian religion, but the division was between the Shaktas and the Vaishnavas. So here the songs about Krishna and Radha were being sung. And here the song that was sung was about Radha being piqued at Sri Krishna's visiting with Chandravali, another one of the gopis of Vrindavan. And so the sense of this is that Radha was being accused of being jealous. That why should she be jealous? Why shouldn't she just be thinking about the happiness of Krishna? If Krishna wanted to go and visit Chandravali, why should she be like a common woman getting jealous that her lover is visiting someone else? So then Radha explains that she's not angry that he went to Chandravali. It's that Chandravali doesn't know how to take care of Sri Krishna. And so the idea is that she was thinking about the happiness of Sri Krishna. She was upset that Sri Krishna went somewhere where someone didn't know how to take proper care of him. So that was it for that day. And now we come to May 20th, 1883. The following Sunday, a kirtan was arranged at the house of Ram, one of the master's householder devotees. Sri Ramakrishna graced the occasion with his presence. The musicians sang about Radha's pangs at her separation from Krishna. So here again is another Vaishnava occasion, but this must have been Ramchandra Datta. He's just as Ram, a devotee Ram. But the most famous Ram of Sri Ramakrishna's devotees, among his devotees, was Ramchandra Datta, who was the uncle of Naren, that is the future Swami Vivekananda. And Ram had strong Vaishnava tendencies. So the musician sang about Radha's pangs at her separation from Krishna. Radha said to her friends, "I have loved to see Krishna from my childhood. My fingernails are worn off from counting the days on them till I shall see him. Once he gave me a garland. Look, it is withered, but I have not yet thrown it away. Alas, where has the moon of Krishna risen now? Has that moon gone away with my firmament, afraid of the Rahu of my peak? Alas, shall I ever see Krishna again? Oh, my beloved Krishna, I have never been able to look at you to my heart's complete satisfaction. I have only one pair of eyes. They blink and so hinder my vision. And further, on account of streams of tears, I could not see enough of my beloved. The peacock feather on the crown of his head shines like arrested lightning. Seeing Krishna's dark cloud complexion, would dance in joy, spreading their tails. O friends, I shall not be able to keep my life breath. After my death, place my body on a branch of the dark Tamala tree and inscribe on my body Krishna's sweet name." So now most of this will be clear in meaning to those who are from India, but for those who are not, let me explain a bit. In this song, Radha explains to her friends, "I have loved to see Krishna from my childhood. My fingernails are worn off by counting the days on them, like so, counting the days until she can see Krishna. So she's counted the days so much that she says her fingernails are worn down. And that he gave her a garland, and the garland has withered, but she hasn't thrown it away because it's associated with Krishna. Krishna gave it to her, and so she can't throw it away, even though it's withered around her neck. So we remember Holy Mother, Jiten? Someone is at the door. Can you see what they need? Holy Mother, not because of her longing in this case, but because of her love, she kept things like things that Sister Nivedita had given her, an old chadar which had become moth-eaten and worn. She kept it because Nivedita had given it to her, and she kept it carefully because she was devoted to the mother. And so, because Nivedita was devoted to the mother and because of the mother's love for Nivedita. And so this is a similar thing, except that it's love for God rather than for a devotee, God's love for a devotee. Has the moon gone away from my firmament, afraid of Rahu, of the Rahu of my peak? And so Rahu here relates to the Indian mythology, the idea of the eclipse of the sun and moon. The mythology is that there's a demon called Rahu who eats the sun and the moon at the time of the eclipse. And so here she's comparing her peak at not seeing Krishna to Rahu. And therefore Krishna doesn't come to see me. Krishna, whom I have given my heart to, whom I love more than anything, more than life itself, he doesn't come. So perhaps he's afraid of my peak, the Rahu of my peak, who will consume him. So shall I ever see Krishna again? I have never been able to look at you to my heart's complete satisfaction. I have only one pair of eyes. They blink and so hinder my vision. So again, that's the extreme devotion of Radha, an expression of that extreme devotion where she wants to see Krishna so intimately and so closely and without interruption that even blinking is a botheration because it blocks him from her sight for a moment. And further, on account of streams of tears, I could not see enough of my beloved, and the same idea. Because she's weeping for Krishna, the tears block her vision. The peacock feather on the crown of his head shines like arrested lightning. And that's clear. The peacocks, seeing Krishna's dark cloud complexion, would dance in joy, spreading their tails. And again, for those not from India, that the peacocks dance during the rainy season. When the clouds of the rainy season come, then they begin to dance and spread their tails. And so seeing Krishna and his dark complexion, they have the same reaction. Oh, friends, I shall not be able to keep my life breath, my prana. That is, my prana, the life force itself, will depart because of my longing. After my death, place my body on a branch of the dark tamala tree and inscribe on my body Krishna's sweet name, because the name of God and God are said to be the same. Nam, Nami, Abhed. There's no difference between the name of God, that is the mantra, and the divine itself. And so if you inscribe the name of Krishna on my body, then it will be uniting me with Krishna. Then the master said, God and his name are identical. That is in Ram and his holy name. And that's the end of that day. So these 2 days that we just read are very short days, unusual in the gospel that there's a day that's all that was recorded. And so both probably are from the 5th volume. Then we come to May 27th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna was in his room at Dakshineshwar, conversing with the devotees. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. Master, to M and the other devotees who had gathered, it is not good to harbor malice. The Shaktas, the Vaishnavas, and the Vedantists quarrel among themselves. That is not wise. Padmalochan was court pundit of the Maharaja of Burdwan. Once at a meeting, the pundits were discussing whether Shiva was superior to Brahma or Brahma to Shiva. Padmalochan gave an appropriate reply. I don't know anything about it, he said. I haven't talked either to Shiva or to Brahma. And so that is a famous thing, or made famous by Sri Ramakrishna. statement of Padmalochan, a great Pandit, who was one of those. Padmalochan and Vaishnav Charan, two great Pandits, both of whom affirmed after studying Sri Ramakrishna and his states of consciousness, his states of ecstasy, affirmed that in their opinion he was an incarnation of God. He was an avatara. Those of you who have studied the life of Sri Ramakrishna will remember that the Bhairavi Brahmani, one of the gurus of Sri Ramakrishna, who taught him the Vaishnava disciplines and also the Tantrika disciplines, that she, just after meeting Sri Ramakrishna, she was convinced that he was an incarnation of God, which Sri Ramakrishna found amusing. He wasn't elated by it or anything else. He was amused by it. And Mathur Babu, being somewhat skeptical, very devoted to Ramakrishna, but of a skeptical nature, he was slow to accept it. And so court pundits were brought in order to give their opinion on the state of Sri Ramakrishna. So at different times, Padmalochan and Vaishnav Charan came to Sri Ramakrishna, studied his states of consciousness, and determined that he was such. So Padmalochan was one such, and Sri Ramakrishna used to sometimes quote things that Padmalochan and Vaishnav Charan had said, because both of them had association with him for some time. So this was a famous incident, or made famous by Sri Ramakrishna, that Padmalochan asked the Pandits who were arguing whether Shiva was greater or Brahma, the creator, was greater. He said that I haven't spoken to either one of them, so how could I know? The idea is that we argue over religious matters out of our ignorance, not out of our knowledge. Those who say that my God is greater than your God, my God is more powerful than your God, those are statements made out of ignorance, which Sri Ramakrishna had no patience with. So he always would emphasize a liberal attitude. He emphasized also that one should have nishtha, that is, single-pointed devotion to one's way of thinking about God, one's way of approaching God, but that nishtha should be founded in a broad religious liberalism, that is, an acceptance of all paths. So, as it's said in a verse, say yea, yea to all, but keep your own seat firm. That is, yes, all views of God, all approaches to God, all approaches to the divine, even those that deny God, like the Buddhist path and the Sankhya Hindu path, who don't have anything to do with, they don't believe in God, but they believe in spiritual reality. And so say yes to all, but whatever your own path is, keep firm in that, because you have to dig in one place. You can't dig everywhere for water. You have to concentrate at one point and dig there until you find water. Then you'll find that the water you found is the same water that's in the whole water table under the whole ground. But you don't get there until you concentrate on one point and go deep enough to get it. And so start with a liberal attitude, knowing that all are true, but hold your own seat firm. That is, dig in one place, to use the other metaphor. And then when you find water, you'll find also that, yes, the liberal attitude is true, that this water is the same in all wells. It's the same water table that we're coming to. So Sri Ramakrishna continues, if people feel sincere longing, they will find that all paths lead to God. But one should have nishtha, single-minded devotion. It is also described as chaste and unswerving devotion to God. It is like a tree with only one trunk shooting straight up. Promiscuous devotion is like a tree with 5 branches, or that is, branching trunks, 5 trunks coming up from the ground. Such was the single-minded devotion of the gopis to Krishna, that they didn't care to look at anyone but the Krishna they had seen at Vrindavan, the shepherd Krishna. bedecked with a garland of yellow and wild flowers, and wearing a peacock feather on his crest. At the sight of Krishna at Mathura, with a turban on his head and dressed in royal robes, the gopis pulled down their veils. They would not look at his face. "Who is this man?" they said. "Should we violate our chaste love for Krishna by talking to him?" So here again, Sri Ramakrishna brings up the idea of nishtha, the idea of single-minded devotion. And again, why? I've already explained, but let me approach it from a slightly different angle. The reason why it's that single-minded devotion and the single following of a single idea, the reason why that's necessary is that it brings the mind to one-pointedness. If the mind is interested in all sorts of things and pursuing all sorts of different things, then the mind doesn't attain to one-pointedness, but the mind becomes unified, concentrated, unified, ekagra, one-pointed, by following one thing and keeping the mind on that until that becomes the whole universe. There's a beautiful incident that I've been trying to find, but I can't yet find it. Not that I've spent a lot of time, just casually looking a little here and there. Beautiful anecdote from the life of a Zen student, one of the classic tales of Zen Buddhism. He was the follower, I believe it was during the Chinese period of Zen Buddhism, or it was Chan Buddhism, which is the Chinese form of the original form of Zen Buddhism, Zen being Japanese. This student, he was the practitioner of a koan, one of the Zen puzzles. And that was, does a dog have the Buddha nature? The question was asked by a student to the master, does a dog have a Buddha nature? And the master answered, mu in, I think mu in Japanese and wu in Chinese. And so one, in practicing that koan, one would concentrate on the question, does a dog have the Buddha nature? And the answer, wu, which means no. But it's no like just shutting down the whole question, not like no, it doesn't have Buddha nature. It's no like shut down the question itself. And so this student of Zen took up the koan, and he focused on that, the question and the answer until the answer wu. He said that it became like a ball of molten iron that was in my chest, burning day and night, so that there was nothing in the whole universe except for that one word, wu. And so it's a beautiful statement. It's much longer than that. He describes where he came to the point where there was nothing in the whole universe but that wu, until that gave way to enlightenment. So again, the idea is that if we attain to one-pointedness of mind by concentrating on a black dot, by concentrating on a deity, by concentrating on God, by concentrating on a mantra, by concentrating on a koan, whatever, when the mind attains to one-pointedness, then there's a flash of illumination. And so for that reason also nishtha is needed. So coming back here to the text, such was the single-minded devotion of the gopis to Krishna that they didn't care to look at anyone but the Krishna of Vrindavan. So as most of you know, Sri Krishna, as he began to grow up, he was taken to Mathura, to the royal palace there. And when the gopis went to see him in Mathura, they saw him with a turban and in royal robes. And they, because their whole heart was fixed on the Krishna of Vrindavan. Here it says shepherd. He never was a shepherd. He was a cowherd. So they were in love with, consumed with love for the cowherd Krishna, with the peacock feather in his hair and simple village dress. And when they saw Krishna, the royal Krishna, they were nonplussed and said, what do we have to do with this man? We have given our love to the Krishna of Vrindavan. So again, that's the idea of single-minded ekagra bhakti, devotion. Sri Ramakrishna continues, the devotion of the wife to her husband is also an instance of unswerving love. She feeds her brothers-in-law as well and looks after their comforts, but she has a special relationship to her husband. Likewise, one may have that single-minded devotion to one's own religion, but one should not on that account hate other faiths. On the contrary, one should have a friendly attitude toward them. So that's a beautiful analogy, that the analogy of the husband. The husband has love for his sisters-in-law also. Or no, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. That the wife has love for her brothers-in-law also, and but her love for her husband is special. It's not comparable to the love that she has for her brothers-in-law is not comparable to the love that she has for her husband. And so we should say yes, yes to all. Yea, yea, to all, but hold our own seat firm. Again, that same idea. That love all, respect all, but know that this is where I'm digging my well. This is where I'm focusing my mind. The master bathed in the Ganges and then went to the Kali temple with M. He sat before the image and offered flowers at the feet of the Divine Mother. Now and then he put flowers on his own head and meditated. Put flowers on his own head and meditated. That's those of you who are familiar with puja, with the ritual worship, know that at a certain point in the worship, you take a flower and hold it hold it for meditation while you chant a meditation verse. Then you take the flower and put it on your head and meditate, thinking that the deity is inside, that the deity is within your heart. And so you're laying the flower here in recognition of the presence of the deity within. And so Sri Ramakrishna was doing that. He wasn't doing it as a ritual, of course. He had no need for rituals. He was doing it because for him it was a reality. He saw nothing but the Divine Mother within himself. That's why he would never use the pronoun I. I'm going to do this, or I think this. He would say the opinion of this place, because the ego had been destroyed, and only the presence of the Divine Mother was there. And now we come to the text again. After a long time, he stood up. He was in a spiritual mood and danced before the image, chanting the name of Kali. Now and again he said, "O Mother, O destroyer of suffering, O remover of grief and agony." Was he teaching people thus to pray to the Mother of the universe with a yearning heart in order to get rid of the suffering inevitable in physical life? So he says more about that in a moment. So instead of giving an interpretation of that, let us go forward to, it won't come for a good ways. So let me say a word about it, because it'll take a little while to get to where he speaks about that. So here, he's saying again, "O Mother, O destroyer of suffering, O remover of grief and agony." So M asks whether he's thereby teaching people that it's through through devotion to the Mother, that through devotion that one gets rid of the sufferings in physical life. So what he says later on in this text is that it's not good to think about the sufferings of life. Rather, think about the joy of union with God, to think about the joy of the thought of God and joy of union with God. That if you think too much about the sufferings of life, then that becomes overwhelming. And again, M asks whether the Master is praying that way. One of the things that we can do in our practice is to pray for delight in the thought of spiritual things. That's not a bad prayer at all. That's a very good prayer. May I delight in spiritual thought. Why do we find it difficult to think of spiritual things? Because the mind has become perverse. And because for us now, because the mind is perverse in its present state, we have to force the mind to think of spiritual things. Part of us wants to, and that's why we do it. But it's work to try to turn the mind, and the mind keeps trying to go back to its usual thoughts, its usual worldly thoughts. But if once we begin to take delight in spiritual thought, then the mind wants to dwell there. The mind wants to go in that direction. And so it's a very good prayer to pray for delight in spiritual thought, to delight in the repetition of the mantra, to delight in meditation. Because once that comes, then most of our problems are over. Once the mind wants to think about God and wants to remain in the thought of God, then we're on a smooth path, and the sufferings of life begin to disappear. Sri Ramakrishna returned to his room and sat on the west porch. Again, he had gone to take a bath, and Sri Ramakrishna returned to his room and sat on the west porch. That's the porch that overlooks, the small porch that overlooks the Ganges. Rakal Im, Nakur Vaishnav, and other devotees were with him. Nakur had been known to the master for about 25 years. He was a devotee of Gauranga and had a small shop which Sri Ramakrishna had often visited when he first came to Calcutta from Kamarpukur. So Sri Ramakrishna had known him since the time he first came from Kamarpukur to Calcutta. And so he was there in the circle of devotees. Still overpowered with divine ecstasy, the master sang, "O Kali, my mother full of bliss, enchantress of the almighty Shiva, in thy delirious joy thou dancest, clapping thy hands together. Eternal One, thou great first cause, clothed in the form of the void, thou wearest the moon upon thy brow. Where didst thou find thy garland of heads before the universe was made? Thou art the mover of all that move, and we are but thy helpless toys. We move alone as thou movest us, and speak as through us thou speakest. But worthless Kamalakanta says, fondly berating thee, Confoundress, with thy flashing sword, thoughtlessly thou hast put to death my virtue and my sin alike." So this is a beautiful song of Kamalakanta, a great saint of the Kali tradition, the worship of Kali. Kamalakanta and Ram Prasad were two of the a number of great Shakta saints of Bengal. And their songs were very dear to Sri Ramakrishna. The songs were known throughout Bengal at that time, and still to some, though not as much as at that time. Now, one of the problems in modern life is that we have so many opportunities for entertainment, so many things to keep our minds occupied, so many things to entertain ourselves with, that there is a huge amount of entertainment competing with spiritual thinking. But in simpler times, when people didn't have so many ways to divert the mind, then the diversions were much simpler, and it was easier to keep the mind focused because even when I lived in India before in the 1970s and 80s, when India was still much simpler than it has become now with the complexities of modern industrialized and commercial life. At that time, you would see simple villagers that they would spend their time sitting around together singing bhajans. You still see that to some extent, but nothing like it used to be in the 70s and 80s. And I'm sure in Sri Ramakrishna's time, a century earlier, it was far more than what I saw. But even that was very beautiful to see, that when workers would take a break from their work, that is masons and bricklayers taking a break from building buildings nearby, I would see them sitting gathered together and singing devotional songs. You don't see that much anymore. So in this song it says, "O Kali, my mother full of bliss, enchantress of the almighty Shiva, in thy delirious joy thou dancest, clapping thy hands together. Eternal One, thou great first cause, clothed in the form of the void." So she is dressed in the clothes of the void. That is, she's completely naked because she is the naked truth of life. Kali represents the naked truths of life. Nothing hidden. She's the giver of life, the giver of death. Things that we try to hide from, the difficulties of life that we try to hide from, those are exposed in the image of Kali. And so she's clothed in the form of the void. Thou wearest the moon upon thy brow. Where didst thou find thy garland of heads before the universe was made? So she has a garland of heads on which which is her japa mala. She tells the name of God on the a rosary of severed heads. So where did she get the garland of severed heads before the creation of the universe? Because she is the beginningless one. She's the source of the universe itself. So thou art the mover of all that move, and we are but thy helpless toys. Yes, we think that we do things, but actually it's the Divine Mother who does everything. As I've said many times, and I will say many times in the future also, I say that, well, I'm going to speak, but we don't know how we speak. It just happens. We have the idea, okay, now it's time to give a class. I have to start saying something, and so somehow it happens. But how it happens, we have no idea. We can't, we think that we're in control. That's how the ego fools us. The ego makes us think that we are in control. But if I try to control the speaking process and think about it in detail, I can't speak because it's so complex. The number of muscles and nervous impulses and things that are sent in order to control the vocal organs, which is more than just the tongue and the vocal cords and the respiration and the lips and the formation of the whole mouth. All of that is extremely complex. We don't know how we do it. It just happens. And even something like raising my hand. I'll say, okay, I'm going to raise my hand. I go like that. Do I know how I did it? No, I have no idea. The number of muscles that have to be controlled, the nervous impulses, the signals from the brain through the nerves to the muscles, and the response from the muscles through the nerves back to the brain. All of that, I have no idea how it happens. And even if I study physiology and all the detail possible with modern science, I still don't know how I do it. Nobody knows how we do it. It just happens. And yet we say, I walk, I speak, I sit down, I raise my arm, etc. We don't know how we do it because all is done by the Divine Mother. So that's the idea here. We move alone as thou movest us, and speak as through us thou speakest. But worthless Kamalakanta says, fondly berating thee. So Kamalakanta berates the Mother Kali. And that's a common thing in Hindu devotion, to berate the beloved, not out of hatred or dislike or anything, but to berate them lovingly. Confoundress, addressing Kali, confoundress, with thy flashing sword, thoughtlessly thou hast put to death my virtue and my sin alike. So that is that one who attains to the highest state, neither virtue nor sin means anything to them because they're established in the pristine purity of the divine reality itself, where all dualities, all pairs of opposites, all contradictions, all conflicts are resolved. And there's nothing but the non-dual reality itself, wherein no contradiction, no confusion, no conflict, No pairs of opposites can exist. And so that's the significance of that. And so then Sri Ramakrishna sings another song. Mother, thou art our sole redeemer, thou the support of the three gunas, higher than the Most High. Thou art compassionate, I know, who takest away our bitter grief. Sandhya art thou and Gayatri. Thou dost sustain this universe. Mother, thou dost sustain this universe. Mother, the help art thou of those that have no help but thee, O eternal beloved of Shiva. Thou art in earth, in water thou liest at the root of all. In me, in every creature, thou hast home. Though clothed with form, yet art thou formless reality. So this is a very famous and very beautiful song. Ma tvam hi tara. O Mother, thou art the Savioress. Ma tvam hi tara. Thou art the sole Redeemer. Thou art the support of the three gunas, the sattva, rajas, and tamas. You, O Divine Mother, you are the reality behind the gunas. The gunas are your play, not your reality, because you are chinmoy, you are consciousness itself. But you play with the three gunas, that is the root of creation. All of creation is said in the Hindu tradition to be the play of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Sattva, illumination, brightness, intelligence, clarity, purity. Rajas, passion, activity, action and reaction. And tamas, inertia, darkness, destruction, etc. Inertia, darkness, destruction, etc. And so these three gunas, everything in the universe is a manifestation of the play of these three gunas. But the reality behind the three gunas, the reality supporting the three gunas is Mother Kali, the Divine Mother. So you are compassionate, I know, who takest away our bitter grief. So yes, the meaning of the image of Mother Kali is not that Mother Kali is the terrible. She appears in her terrible form only to show us that even when the terrors of life come, behind them is the all-loving, all-compassionate Mother herself. So if we can learn to accept all of the experiences that come to us in life, learn to accept them because they're all given by the Divine Mother, good and bad and indifferent, then we're free. Then we're free because we see everything as happening as the play of the Divine Mother and we're unaffected by anything. And so though the form of Kali is outwardly terrible, she is showing us the Abhaya Mudra, the sign of fearlessness. Fear not, because I, Kali, am your mother, the all-loving, all-compassionate mother. Then Sandhya art thou and Gayatri. Sandhya, that is the twilight devotions at the sunrise and sunset done by the Hindus. And Gayatri, the sacred prayer of the Rig Veda, which is the essence of the Sandhya ceremony. That we meditate on the effulgent glory. We meditate on the effulgent glory of that resplendent being who has projected the three worlds. May that illuminate our hearts. So that is the Gayatri. And you, O Divine Mother, you are Gayatri itself. You are the evening devotions as well. You sustain this universe. Mother, the help art thou of those who have no help but thee. So she is the one who helps those who have no other help. So if we go to her, she is the mother who is there to help us and to redeem us. Thou art in earth, Jole. Thou art in earth, thou art in water. Thou liest at the root of all. That is, you are in everything. In me and every creature, thou hast thy home. Though clothed with form, yet art thou the formless reality. So Kali appears with form, and yet she is the formless reality itself, beyond all idea of form and manifestation. The master sang a few more songs in praise of the Divine Mother. Then he said to the devotees, This is what I was talking about before. It is not always best to tell householders about the sorrows of life. They want bliss. So let me stop there before the paragraph is over and say that yes, it's not good to tell householders about the sorrows of life because we have enough experience of the sorrows of life. We don't need someone to remind us of the sorrows of life. That's what we're immersed in. And so if we come to religion and there only we hear about the miseries of life, then what's the use? We see that what we need is a remedy. What we need is some way to get out of the miseries of life. And so religion is that which shows us the way beyond the sufferings of life, beyond the miseries of life, to a resplendent realm where all is joy and rejoicing. They, meaning householders, want bliss. Those who suffer from chronic poverty can go without food for a day or two, but it is not wise to talk about the sorrows and miseries of life to those who suffer if their food is delayed a few minutes. So that's most of us. We are not used to having to go for days without food because we're so poor we can't afford to buy any. And so we're irritated if our meal is delayed by a few minutes. And so for such people to talk about the sorrows of life, it won't do. Vaishnava Charan used to say, so earlier this morning, we read a passage referred to Padma Lochan, one of the great pundits of the time, who had come to inspect Sri Ramakrishna's states of ecstasy. And so Vaishnava Charan I mentioned in that context. Also, he's mentioned here. So as I said earlier today, Sri Ramakrishna often used to refer to and quote Padma Lochan and Vaishnav Charan. So here, Vaishnav Charan used to say, "Why should one constantly dwell on sin? Be merry." So that was Swami Vivekananda's method also. He used to say in this country, in America, he would say, "People here tell me that I'm a man of the cloth and so I shouldn't joke so much. I'm serious once in a while, but only when I have a stomachache." That is the idea that religion is a life of joy. It should be a life of joy. It should be a life that gives us relief from the sufferings of ordinary life, which takes us beyond the sufferings of ordinary life. So again, if you come to religion and there only hear about the sufferings of life, then what's the use? What's the use? While the master was resting after his midday meal, Manohar Goswami, a singer of kirtan, arrived. He sang about the ecstatic love of Gauranga and the divine episode of Vrindavan. The master was absorbed in a deep spiritual mood. He tore off his shirt and said to the melody of the kirtan, assuming the attitude of Radha, "O Krishna, my beloved, O friends, bring Krishna to me. Then you will be real friends. Or take me to him, and I will be your slave forever." So that, of course, the meaning of this is clear. The musician Manohar Goswami, the musician sat spellbound at Sri Ramakrishna's ecstasy. So here, this musician who was a known musician in the area, and that was what he did. He went around singing kirtan, Vaishnava kirtans, being a Goswami. But here he sees someone who goes to the heart of the kirtan. So everybody enjoys good music, and everybody enjoys singing and all of that. But here to see Sri Ramakrishna hearing the lyrics of the songs he's singing, and Sri Ramakrishna going into a transcendental state where he's identified with the truth which is being expressed through the singing. Sri Ramakrishna, there was no falsity in him. There was no show. There was no pretense. There was no putting on of acting. It was identification with the idea and the mood of the song. And so this singer must have been enraptured to see that as he's singing, Sri Ramakrishna goes to the depths of the meaning of the song, the heart of the song, identified with it. The musician sat spellbound at Sri Ramakrishna's ecstasy. Then he said with folded hands, "Won't you please rid me of my worldliness?" So here, this Goswami, this Vaishnava teacher and singer, he sees the ecstasy of Sri Ramakrishna and sees the difference between Sri Ramakrishna's deep identity with the song and his own singing of the song, but not feeling the deep meaning of it. And so that contrast between what he gets out of the singing of the song and what Sri Ramakrishna gets out of the singing of the song makes him say this: "Won't you please rid me of my worldliness? Master, you are like the holy man who went about the city after first finding a lodging. You are a sweet person and express many sweet ideas." So here Sri Ramakrishna praises the singer. He calls him a sweet person and says that you express many sweet ideas. And that you're like the holy man who went about the city after first finding a lodging. So that refers to something Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that first, when you come to a place of pilgrimage, first secure your lodging, and then the mind will be free to go out and enjoy the holy sights. So there's a meaning behind that. Sri Ramakrishna didn't say anything without a deep meaning. And as Swami Vivekananda said, when he was still Narendra, he said that any of the sayings of Sri Ramakrishna, that if you begin to look into them, even the simplest sayings, you'll find untold depth in what he said. And so he was challenged at that time, when he was still Narendra, he was challenged by one of the other devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. And so Narayan said, "You take any of Sri Ramakrishna's sayings." And so this other devotee mentioned something, a teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, or a saying of his, and Swamiji, or Narayan at that time, began to expound on the meaning, the inner meaning of what Sri Ramakrishna said. And he went on for 2 days talking about all of the implications of what it was Sri Ramakrishna said. So everything that Sri Ramakrishna said had profound depth. And so that when you go to a holy place, first secure your lodging, and then you can go about and enjoy the sights. That is, that if you go to the holy place and first you've got your luggage and everything, and you want to go to the temple and things, your mind is partly on trying to protect that which you have with you. So first go and secure that, then the mind is free. Then you can plunge the mind into the joy of seeing the places of pilgrimage that you've come to. And so in spiritual life also, that first be done with first secure your worldly responsibilities, get those taken care of, so that the mind is free. If you go to sit for meditation, to sing bhajans and so forth, and your mind is preoccupied with all of the things that you haven't done, then how can you plunge the mind into deeper thought? And so be done with the things of the world so that the mind is free to think of God. Musician: "Sir, I am like the bullock that only carries the bag of sugar but cannot taste it. Alas, I myself do not enjoy the sweetness of divine bliss." So here you see that the Goswami, Manohar Goswami, was a good man, as Sri Ramakrishna saw, that he was simple, he was sweet by nature, and so he recognizes that I want that which you have. I want that, and I don't have it. And so please free me from the burden of worldliness, which keeps my mind tied to the world. And then continues the narration. The melodious music went on, and all were filled with joy. So we can only imagine the atmosphere in the room when Sri Ramakrishna would be in ecstasy. There'd be beautiful singing, people joining in the singing, Sri Ramakrishna improvising lines to the songs and so forth, dancing sometimes, going into ecstasy. So the extraordinary sense of joy that came. Sri Ramakrishna has been called by some the Anandavatara. the incarnation of bliss, incarnation of the bliss aspect of the divine. The divine in the Hindu tradition, the Vedanta tradition, is Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss itself. And Sri Ramakrishna was a special manifestation of the bliss aspect of the divine, because you see in his life this constant manifestation of joy and bliss. In fact, it's said that when he was a child in Kamarpukur, just a small child, that he went wherever people were bright and happy. He liked to be them. He shunned places of sorrow because he was the incarnation of joy itself. So we'll stop here because we've come to the end of another day. These 3 days we did is very, very rare in the gospel that we do 3 days in one class. We usually don't do one full day in a class. We do part of a day. But because these were all short days, so next time we'll continue with Saturday, June 2nd, 1883. So now if there are any questions, there is one. A comment, okay, good. Last one, okay. So Anuradha Sadananda Mayakali. Oh, the first one. No. Oh, down here. Oh, what are other incarnations like Rama and Krishna compared to? From Subhash. So that they're not. I haven't seen them compared to Sat, Chit, or Ananda. It's not that they were Nirananda without Ananda. It's just that in Sri Ramakrishna's life, he was so full of joy, so full of bliss, which he radiated on all sides, that he's called the incarnation of bliss. So it's not to contrast him with Rama, Krishna, Jesus, etc. But that's just said about him. So there's not a comparative statement that I've seen about Rama and Krishna and other incarnations. Though that's a good question, but that is... Oh. Yeah, Sarananda Mayakali, Mahakalir Mon Mohini. Yes. Yeah, so that's the song. And Kamala has said that it's on volume 5 of the gospel, divided into 5 volumes. These days were in volume, as I guessed, it was in volume 5. So thank you, Kamala. Thank you, Anuradha, and then thank you for the question, Subhash. So with that, we will conclude. Let me give announcements, and then I'll give a closing chant. On Sunday, we will have our first lecture of the new season, and the topic will be the work before us. And again, that's a topic that I usually treat once every year at the beginning of a season. And so I'll treat it once again this year, in which I'll talk about the work before us in the sense of the work for us as individual practitioners, the work for us as a Vedanta Society of Greater Houston, and the work before us as a worldwide movement. So on these different levels, I'll speak about what it is that where is the wheel that we're to put our shoulder to in the work ahead of us. And then next week, we'll continue with the Gita class on Tuesday evening at 7:30, live streamed also, and the gospel class next Thursday at this same time, 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time. So for the rest of this month, the classes and lectures will be as usual. And in October, on October 17th, we will have Durga Puja. But this year, because of the pandemic, we won't have the tent outside and the huge celebration with 700 people coming. We regret that we won't be able to do that because of the exigencies of the pandemic. And so we will have the puja. We'll have it here in the temple. In fact, basically here where I'm sitting right now. And there will not be, it will not be an open auditorium for people to come. Only those who are helping with the actual service of the ritual worship will be allowed to be here at the time of the worship. We will live stream it so people can see it. And we'll try to make provision for people to come and make pranam one by one or in family groups in a safe way after the puja has been completed. So those are all of the announcements for now. Let me give a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama.